For the unfortunate Jews living in Nazi Germany and its occupation zones, life during the war was scarcely bearable. As the Nazi plans for the Holocaust, the final eradication of Jews and Jewish culture from Europe, were put into action, a few brave souls made a stand. From the forests, the ghettos, and the hellish extermination camps, Jews fought back against those who sought to destroy them. In this video, we tell their stories. When the Germans took over Poland in 1939, one of their priorities was to set up the now infamous Jewish ghettos. The primary function of these ghettos was to restrict the movement of Jewish people to a certain area. By 1940, most ghettos were fully enclosed with brick walls and barbed wire. Patrolling German police and soldiers were ordered to shoot anyone attempting to leave or enter the ghetto. The largest ghetto was located in the Polish capital of Wasaw. This immense inner-city prison camp covered 3.4 square kilometers and housed 460,000 Jewish prisoners at its peak. However, these numbers soon began to dwindle. In 1941, the daily food ration for each person living in the ghetto was cut to just 184 calories, less than 1% of what the average person needs. This spawned a lucrative black market. First, it was just food being smuggled into the ghetto, but it wasn't long before weapons started coming in too. These were carefully stockpiled by the Jewish Combat Organization and Jewish Military Union known as the ZOB and ZZW. In the summer of 1942, the deportations began. Without warning, German soldiers entered the ghettos to round up people for what they said was resettlement in the east. In reality, they were being sent to extermination camps. The largest of these deportations was scheduled for January 1943, but this time, the resistance was prepared. On January 18th, SS troops and German police stormed into the Warsaw ghetto. They shot 600 people and then began rounding up another 5,000. Then, seemingly from nowhere, the resistance appeared. This spawned a lucrative black market. First, it was just food being smuggled into the ghetto, but it wasn't long before weapons started coming in too. These were carefully stockpiled by the Jewish Combat Organization and Jewish Military Union known as the ZOB and ZZW. Men and women of the ZOB and ZZW threw a barrage of Molotov cocktails at their oppressors, then opened fire with pistols at close range. The Germans were decimated and rapidly forced out of the ghetto. Expecting a counterattack, the resistance fighters set up fortifications. They held out until April, beating back several German attacks and forcing the resignation of the German commander. But on the 19th, 2,000 SS troops launched a massive frontal assault. The resistance was well prepared, but couldn't hope to withstand such numbers. They went down fighting, forcing the SS to capture the ghetto block by block. Afterwards, the Germans liquidated the site, killing and deporting an estimated 56,065 people. But their last stand hadn't been in vain. Their sacrifice inspired uprisings in 100 different ghettos across eastern Poland. For those who managed to escape starvation and deportation in the ghettos, there were other ways to fight back against the Nazis. Many Jews joined partisan units operating from forests across Europe. Jewish partisans were active in Poland, France, Belgium, the Soviet Union, the Baltic, and Yugoslavia. Some groups, such as the famous Bielski Partisans of Poland, looked after Jewish civilians. Others, like the Belarusian Chokalov Brigade, only accepted armed fighters with some combat experience. Outside Lithuania and Yugoslavia, there was no cohesive partisan central command. Each group had its own objectives and set its own rules. Some groups stole food, clothing, and supplies from civilians at gunpoint, while others tried to establish civilian communes. Communist partisan groups operating in the occupied Soviet Union were occasionally supplied directly by the Red Army and given military orders, but most didn't receive this level of support. They relied on the individual skills of their members and supplies looted from the enemy. It's estimated that between 20,000 and 30,000 Jews served as partisans during the Second World War. 4,500 of these were from Yugoslavia alone, where they helped to liberate the country from Axis rule. A further 3,000 Jewish partisans fought on the front lines. Over 1/3 were killed in action, and 10 were awarded Yugoslavia's highest honor, the Order of the People's Hero. Even though they were often beaten, starved, and worked to near death, some of the extermination camp prisoners found the strength to fight back. There were many small acts of sabotage, especially in camps where prisoners were forced to manufacture war materials. In some camps, Jewish prisoners banded together to launch full-scale revolts. At the Treblinka extermination camp in August 1943, 2 young men managed to steal the armory key from a guard. Using scrap, they successfully copied the key and replaced the original. The Nazis were none the wiser. The men then sneaked into the armory and stole grenades, ammunition, and weapons, which they distributed to the other inmates. Halfway through this heist, a guard caught another prisoner with stolen money and took him for interrogation. He knew about the plot, and the Jewish ringleaders feared he would spill the beans under torture, so they launched their attack early. They set off a grenade, the signal for the revolt to begin, then attacked the guards with whatever firearms or improvised weapons they could get their hands on. At first, the Nazis were taken by surprise, and the Jewish prisoners managed to kill several, torch their vehicles, burn down their barracks, and destroy fuel supplies. But it wasn't enough. The guards counterattacked with machine guns and killed 1,500 prisoners. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain though, as the camp's gas chambers were made inoperable and, allegedly, the camp was closed due to damage from the revolt. On the flip side of the guns blazing approach was the revolt at Sobibor extermination camp. At this Polish camp in October 1943, the prisoners chose stealth. The revolt was led by Alexander Pekersky, a Jewish Red Army soldier. He was one of the first POWs to be sent to the camp, which otherwise held civilians. On his 3rd day, Pekersky openly defied an SS officer by rejecting cigarettes and bread intended to win him over. This won him the support of the Polish prisoner leadership. A few days later, Pekersky was ordered to sort through the clothing belonging to murdered prisoners from other camps. In a pocket, he found a note from one of these condemned men. It read, "I don't know where they're taking us now. They say to Germany. If all this is a lie, then know that death awaits you too. Do not trust the Germans. Avenge our blood." Knowing what awaited him and the others, Pekersky decided to act. He got a small team together comprising of only the most die-hard anti-Nazis in the camp. Each was assigned a specific SS officer whose routine they memorized. The conspirators then waited for the commandant to leave with some of the auxiliary Ukrainian guards. The revolt kicked off on October 14th, when several of Pekersky's conspirators lured their targets into a warehouse under the guise of presenting them with luxury goods found in the luggage of gassed prisoners. The officers were then brutally hacked to death with axes, chisels, and improvised knives. They then broke into the guards' living quarters and stole some weapons left lying around. Everything went according to plan until a particularly sadistic officer who had left earlier returned unexpectedly. Without knowing a revolt was happening, he shot several prisoners, as he customarily did to instill fear. Pekersky's crew thought the game was up, and so they let loose with everything they had. Yelling, "Hurrah, the revolt has begun," 420 Jewish prisoners stormed the gates. They broke through and fled into the surrounding forest. 80 were killed by fire from the watchtowers and in perimeter minefields. A further 170 were recaptured and executed on Himmler's orders, but 200 made it out alive, including Pekersky. A soldier through and through, Pekersky gathered weapons and a few loyal men before marching toward the front line. Still wearing his original Red Army uniform, he joined a Soviet-backed partisan group and fought as a demolitions expert. He later tried to rejoin the Red Army, but was thrown into a penal unit for the crime of surrendering before he was initially captured. This didn't diminish Pekersky's spirit though, as he earned his way out and into a regular unit by heroism and a near fatal wound. He survived the war as a captain and, at the Nuremberg trials, testified against the SS officers his crew hadn't managed to kill. Not everyone has the courage and fighting spirit of Captain Pekersky, and examples like his were fairly rare. For the vast majority of the European Jewish population, survival itself was the most important form of resistance. The Nazis wanted to eradicate Jewish people and culture from Europe, and the best way to stop that happening was for the Jewish people to simply survive. With the odds so stacked against them, it's genuinely amazing what some managed to accomplish. That was the tenacious story of the Jews who fought tooth and nail to resist the Nazis. But what do you think? Did you know that the Warsaw Ghetto held out for months against the Germans? Did you know there were so many Jewish partisans? And do you think you could have organized a revolt like Captain Pekersky? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.
Mordecai Anielewicz was just 24 when he led the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. With few weapons, his fighters resisted Nazi forces for weeks. Surrounded and outgunned, Anielewicz died in battle, becoming a symbol of defiance and courage.
People started there already to build bunkers underneath, because I guess this was truly the end. And the deportations continued. And when we were on Bonifraterska, this was the first time that we heard about Treblinka. Because, you know, people like to fool themselves. None of us, I mean, this goes for my parents and everybody, we just couldn't believe that indeed that were herding us, transporting us to, as they call Vernichtungslagen, you know, the places where they are going to gas us, you know, kill us off.
By January, when the first resistance was to happen, ghetto, nobody could walk anywhere freely anymore. Ghetto was a series of islands, and you couldn't even go from one to another, except with the risk of life because of the German patrols. Most of the ghetto was empty because by that time only a tenth of the population remained. The rest of it was like a ghost town, and you couldn't. Actually, with other kids, we have learned ways of going from house to house in those ghostly parts without going out in the street, but simply going from one apartment house to another through various secret passages that we...
Was it to play? Did you play with other children in this?
It was not so much play, but in looking for things.
The only chance to survive is to dig bunkers, and camouflage in a way that no one can yet 1, 2, 3 opening. And that was a mass action to start building bunkers. People out of a block of apartments, people of same kind, you know each other, families. So they started all digging and preparing, some hiding part of a floor or something, some rooms so no one could see, and of course underground.
When the organization of the uprising started, my function was to go after curfew and paste the posters calling the Jews to armed rebellion on the walls of the buildings. My father, of course, was, he didn't know what I was doing, but when I was coming home after the curfew, it was a terrible thing. They were terribly, terribly worried.
Whoever had the possibility, the means, financial or otherwise, had friends, was trying to get to the Aryan side. I didn't have that possibility. I didn't have any money, and I didn't have any friends on the Aryan side. And I was trying to get into the Jewish fighting organization where my friends that were working with me.
We anticipate to stock the bunkers at least for a half a year or more, as much as we could with food. We connected fresh water, and we connected some toilets. And the bunkers actually were cellars. And when I say we made a blank wall there, so this divided the cellar. Usually the cellar used to go around the whole house. So we took the end. So one was a blank wall, and the other end we built a blank wall, and we built a hole in the wall, and inside we had a little rails with bricks to fit into the hole. So you closed it up, and you couldn't see from the outside that there is the entrance to the bunker, and you had to crawl in.
The whole episode was becoming an embarrassment for the SS, and particularly for Himmler. They all knew that only a few hundred poorly armed Jews were running rings around the much-vaunted SS. Even the regular army was starting to make disparaging comments about the fighting abilities and leadership of the SS. More than one was comparing what was occurring inside the Warsaw Ghetto to the monumental battle for Stalingrad, coining the name Ghettograd. Although the Germans managed to overrun Kordial Street, they were met by heavy resistance off Muranowski Square on the ghetto's northern edge. The building where the flags flew became a fort to Stroop. Trying to take it cost Stroop 1 officer killed and 52 men wounded. Stroop changed tactics and decided to concentrate his efforts on capturing the smallest part of the ghetto, the Brushmakers district. When the SS tried to storm through the main gate, the Jews detonated a huge IED that they had buried there, killing and wounding many SS. The Germans pulled back in some disarray. On the 22nd of April, following days of bitter fighting, Stroop offered the Jewish fighters surrender terms. These were disdainfully rejected when the Jews opened fire on the 2 SS officers who came forward under a white flag to offer them. They remained under no illusions about what would happen to them if they fell into German hands, regardless of Stroop's attempts to trick them into giving up. Stroop, with Himmler breathing down his neck and aware of how his predecessor von Sammern-Frankenegg had fallen from grace, urged on his troops to complete the destruction of the ghetto with renewed brutality. The fate of von Sammern-Frankenegg would stand as a stark warning of the consequences of failure before Himmler. Just 2 days after Stroop's surrender offer to the ghetto defenders, von Sammern-Frankenegg was court-martialed for ineptitude and accused of defending Jews. An interesting charge, considering that he had been responsible for shipping over 250,000 east from Warsaw for resettlement. Found guilty, von Sammern-Frankenegg was transferred to a frontline anti-partisan unit and later killed in an ambush in Croatia in September 1944. On the 22nd of April, after reorganizing his men, Stroop launched another attack on the Brushmakers district, but the defending Jewish units concentrated all of their firepower on the SS force. Stroop was rapidly becoming disillusioned with combat operations. It was clear that the Jews were using the kinds of tactics that the Soviets had utilized so successfully at Stalingrad against the overwhelming manpower and firepower of the German Sixth Army. The Soviets called it hugging the enemy, conducting very close quarters street fighting, where the Germans could not use their support weapons or aerial superiority without fear of hitting their own men, and simultaneously draining away the Germans' numerical strength and morale. Stroop quickly determined that to continue to launch conventional attacks on the various sectors of the ghetto would only result in Ghettograd and his probable removal from command. Himmler was also growing increasingly nervous about the revolt. On the 23rd of April, he ordered Stroop to clear the ghetto with the greatest severity and ruthless tenacity. This was good news for Stroop, as it freed him from any concerns about causing damage to the city and its infrastructure. He quickly formulated a fresh plan and telephoned Kruger in Krakow. "I have therefore decided," said Stroop, "to embark on the total destruction of the Jewish quarter by burning down every residential block, including the housing blocks belonging to the armaments enterprises." Kruger approved. Stroop's new method for ending the revolt was to burn down all of the houses and buildings inside the ghetto using flamethrowers, and to dynamite basements, cellars, and sewers in an effort to eradicate what both sides termed bunkers. Massive fires swept through the ruined ghetto streets, with many Jews perishing in the flames or being shot down by German troops as they fled the conflagrations. The sewer system proved difficult to capture. SS, police, or army troops entering sewers were often met by heavy fire. The Germans resorted to hurling smoke grenades down open manholes in an attempt to force the Jews out. In a more coordinated effort, 193 sewer entrances were opened at the same time and smoke bombs thrown in. Many of the ghetto fighters suspected gas and fled to the center of the ghetto, while explosives or gunfire killed numerous others. After a few days, the ghetto had been reduced to a pile of smoldering ruins. It looked as though it had been carpet-bombed by aircraft. On the 27th of April, Stroop ordered a large, well-coordinated mopping-up operation. A force of 320 German and Latvian SS, 2 tanks and some half-tracks managed to clear out most of the remaining pockets of resistance around Muranovsky Square. But the Germans continued to be ambushed from behind, often by Jews dressed in captured SS uniforms, which made the Germans very nervous and hesitant. One tank was knocked out in an ambush, and the Jews managed to hold out until nightfall before either being killed or retreating. Whilst the fighting continued, the German destruction policy had netted results. Thousands of Jews fled the fires and were rounded up by the SS for immediate transportation to the east. By the 2nd of May, Stroop was able to report to Kruger that he had apprehended a total of 40,237 Jews. On the same day, the Germans assaulted Mark Edelman's position. Army engineers managed to blow a way into the large bunker. Taking charge, Edelman organized its defense. The fighting lasted for 72 hours, with 7 German casualties reported. Half of the Jewish fighters were killed, and the rest managed to escape. On the 6th of May, the Germans withdrew from the vicinity, and Edelman and the survivors moved to another bunker on Pleasant Street, a vast underground complex that had been carefully constructed over the space of a year. Here, Mordecai Anilovitz and 300 ZOB and ZZW fighters were holed up. The bunker was soon completely surrounded by the SS. Many of the fighters, including Anilovitz, killed themselves with poison on the 8th of May to avoid capture, while Edelman and a handful of survivors somehow made it out and escaped apprehension and death. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising officially ended on the 16th of May 1943. The occasion was marked when Stroop personally pushed the plunger to trigger explosives that the SS had rigged in Warsaw's Great Synagogue. With the synagogue's symbolic destruction, Stroop could report to Himmler that Jewish resistance in Warsaw had been brought to an end. The SS and Wehrmacht had destroyed a total of 631 bunkers throughout the ghetto. With typical Teutonic efficiency, the SS collected and catalogued all the weapons that they had captured or recovered after the battle. It was not an impressive haul, considering the doggedness of the resistance that the Germans had encountered. Of course, many weapons were not recovered, being buried under collapsed buildings, destroyed by fire, or taken out of the ghetto by the surviving fighters. The SS listed just 7 Polish, 1 Russian and 1 German rifle captured, along with 59 pistols of various makes, several hundred hand grenades, Molotov cocktails and homemade explosives. The SS also recovered 1,240 German uniforms that the resistors often used to travel around the ghetto during the fight or to launch ambushes against the SS. The destruction wrought to the center of Warsaw was staggering. Just 8 buildings were left intact after the uprising. Sporadic resistance continued, and it was not until the 5th of June 1943 that the last shots were exchanged between the remnants of the ghetto fighters and the German forces. For those Jews who were captured or remained in the ghetto at the conclusion of the uprising, their fate was transportation to camps in the east. Over 13,000 ghetto inmates had perished during the uprising, and 50,000 were herded onto cattle trains and shipped out. Of 7,000 Jews who had been transported to Treblinka on the 19th of April, shortly before the uprising started, many would be involved in fomenting a fresh revolt that occurred in the camp on the 2nd of August 1943. According to SS records, the Germans lost 17 men killed during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and 101 wounded, though these figures may be on the conservative side. Stroop records that a total of 265,000 ghetto Jews were transported from Warsaw to Treblinka between the 22nd of July and the 12th of September 1943, closing the ghetto. Himmler was pleased with Stroop's leadership during the operation to liquidate the ghetto, and he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. For the major perpetrators, justice for the uprising came in many forms. The Polish underground instituted a British-sponsored Operation Bürkel in October 1943, deliberately targeting Franz Bürkel, a senior Nazi official in the general government, who was cut down by assassins from the Polish Home Army in Warsaw. As mentioned, Ferdinand von Sammern-Frankenegg was killed in an ambush in Croatia by Yugoslav partisans in 1944. Odilo Globocnik committed suicide in May 1945 to avoid war crimes charges. Jürgen Stroop, the man who had orchestrated the crushing of the uprising with the utmost brutality, was arrested by the US Army in 1945 and subsequently handed over to the Poles. Stroop was hanged in Warsaw in March 1952, totally unrepentant to the end. Another Warsaw ghetto administrator, SS Hauptsturmführer Franz Conrad, whom the ghetto inmates had nicknamed the King of the Ghetto, as he had considerably enriched himself by stealing valuables off the Jews, was also hanged by the Poles in Warsaw in 1952. But by and large, the SS and Travnikis who did the actual killing either didn't survive the war or managed to reintegrate into post-war society and never faced prosecution. The brave and determined stand of the Warsaw Jews showed the world that the Jews were not prepared to submit to destruction without a fight, and the fight had both alarmed and deeply unsettled the Germans. But the Germans also learned many valuable lessons from the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, lessons that they would soon put to good use when it came to liquidating the other major Jewish ghettos. For the resistance in Warsaw was not the last time the Jews rose in defense of their ghettos, but it remains the largest and most famous of the ghetto revolts. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my video channel, Mark Felton Productions. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.
No lecie dosłownie, je to poza nami. Všetci sú na miesto. Počuj, spievajú. Tie svine sú spievajú. Pozdržte ďalej! Pozor! Držte pozície! Držte pozície!